Good afternoon. I'd like to call this meeting to order and have the secretary call the roll.
Assemblymember Considine.
Present.
DeLong.
Present.
Gurr.
Here.
Hanson.
Here.
Jackson. Karras.
Present.
Kasama.
Here.
LaRue Hash.
Here.
Marzola.
Present.
Watts.
Here.
Chair Anderson.
And I am present. If you would please mark Assemblymember Jackson absent excused. I would like to welcome everyone to this meeting, those here in Carson City, including Robin Gray, who made the drive-in from Humboldt County. Thank you for being here, Robin. As well as those, anyone joining us in Las Vegas. Not looking very full in that room, or in Elko. Also not looking very full, but I'm sure there's a lot of people listening online. Our agenda for today includes a presentation and 2 bill hearings. Before we begin, I'd like to make some housekeeping announcements. Please silence your electronic devices while in the committee room. Committee members will be using their laptops to view handouts and other exhibits. Please do not view this as a sign of disrespect or inattention. We expect courtesy and respect in our interactions during the meeting, even if we may not agree with another person's position. If you're presenting or testifying, please sign in at the table by the door, leave a business card with the committee assistant, and all exhibits, amendments, or other meeting materials must be submitted electronically to our committee manager by no later than 12 p.m. on the business day before the meeting, and 15 hard copies provided for members of the public. Proposed amendments also need to include the bill number, a statement of intent, and your name and contact information. When testifying in person, please turn on the microphone, clearly state and spell your name, and the organization or agency you represent for the record if you do so. Please turn off the microphone each time you are done speaking. Public comment will be taken at the end of the meeting, and each person will be limited to 2 minutes. You may also submit written testimony or public comment in writing up to 24 hours after the meeting. And finally, please note that agenda items may be taken in a different order than listed. 2 or more agenda items may be combined for consideration, and an item may be removed from an agenda, or discussion of an item or agenda may be delayed at any time. We will begin our meeting with a presentation from NDOW, and thank you for all of our presenters joining us today. If you would please come on up whenever you are ready to do your presentation and introduce yourself for the record.
Yes, good afternoon. For the record, my name is Alan Janae. I'm the Director of Nevada Department of Wildlife, and to my left is Deputy Director Jordan Gosher, Deputy Director of Administrative Services with Nevada Department of Wildlife. And we are here to give you an overview of the Nevada Department of Wildlife and kind of where we've been and what we've been doing since the last session. So, getting started, looking at the department's mission, it is the same mission that it has been for quite some time, and that's to protect, conserve, manage, and restore wildlife and its habitat for the benefit of the citizens of Nevada as well as the United States, and to promote safety of persons using vessels on Nevada's waters. When we look at, next slide, please. When we look at the department structure, it's spread across 3 regions. We have 278 full-time employees. We also have a 9-person Board of Wildlife Commissioners, approximately 120 buildings, 14 wildlife management areas, 4 hatcheries, and as I said, you can see the depiction of the map there of our 3 regions. In the department, we have the different programs or divisions. We have the Director's Office, approximately 33 people in it, and then we have Data and Technology Services Division. That's typically like our IT and our licensing. And then Conservation Education, that's kind of our PIOs and Education Department. Law Enforcement, self-explanatory. We have the Game Management Division, Fisheries Management Division, Biodiversity, and Habitat Divisions, all of our resource divisions. Looking to the Board of Wildlife Commissioners, as I mentioned, There are 9 gubernatorial appointees that sit on there for 3-year terms. Generally, it's a 2-term limit. Sometimes that's exceeded depending on their willingness to serve and the willingness to keep them appointed. Those are typically 3 at a time each year, so 3 individuals come up on their appointments each year, and so it takes 3 years to see that turnover. As far as positions, we have 1 on there that is dedicated to conservation, 1 to farming, 1 ranching, and 1 general public. And 5 of those members have to have held a hunting or fishing license in the 3 of the 4 years preceding their appointment. Next slide, please. So when we think about what the Board of Wildlife Commission was established to do, they were there to establish broad policies and regulations for wildlife management, boating safety. Basically, they provide guidance to the agency's actions and activities to manage all of our species, no matter what they are, all 897 species, as well as providing guidance on our boating safety and enforcement. This is all part of a public process. We have county advisory boards in every county. And then also all of our meetings are public of the Board of Wildlife Commission, and so the general public is also represented in those meetings. NDOW has a very broad statutory charge. As I mentioned, we cover all 897 species in a very large state. This is the 7th largest state, and we are the 5th smallest wildlife agency in the United States, and we do that with 2% general fund. The other 46% comes from federal funds, and the other 52% come from our generating funds from license and tag sales fees or sales. And so it is trying to do a lot with not very many people, 278 employees, and a little bit of general fund. When we think back between this session and the last, we wanted to just highlight some of the accomplishments that we have seen during this time. One of the big ones that was discussed during last session was Cave Lake Dam restoration. Cave Lake was one of those, the dam was actually built in 1939, and in 2018 we received a letter from the state engineer's office highlighting the threats, the risks of that dam possibly failing, and so we went through a process of generating the funds, finding the funds to do it, working with many other partners, the governor's office and DCNR and parks. And in 2021, we began draining that dam, and we're happy to say that we finished that this last year, and it is now filling. And currently, I have updated numbers as of yesterday, and it's 5 feet from full. So we will be establishing a fishery. I was happy to talk to, we got a report back from one of our fisheries biologists that oversee that water. And actually what we're seeing is even some of the fish that were in the stream up above are already coming down and occupying that reservoir. And we haven't even stocked any fish yet. And a fisherman was out there catching fish that had moved down from the stream. So, but we will be taking out some brown trout and rainbow trout from our hatcheries and other waters, and we'll be introducing those very soon this spring. And then eventually we will be introducing smallmouth bass into that water as well. We just wanted to make sure that kind of the food web below those species would be in that reservoir and ready to feed those smallmouth bass. So that'll be a little bit of a delay behind those. Next slide, please. Other things that have been traditionally of interest to this body has been urban wildlife. Our urban wildlife program deals with the wildlife conflicts in these urban areas, typically Clark County and Washoe County, most generally Carson or Reno, but then also even coming down into Carson. In 2024, we received approximately 5,000 calls, with 13% of those related to coyotes. And to those of you that have probably been watching, it's probably no surprise. Our staff spent an estimated 3,500 hours resolving urban wildlife issues during 2024. And that's only that dedicated staff that we're really tracking the numbers on. We receive calls to area biologists as well across the state that often don't end up in this log. So that's just those dedicated positions. In the Urban Wildlife Program, to try to assist people in helping understand wildlife that live in this interface, this urban interfaces, we conduct school programs, homeowner association meetings, community presentations, and anytime, if you've gone to the Clark County Fair, you'll see us there. We're preaching, trying to get people to understand just how to deal with wildlife and also understand how to solve the problems or what to do. We really see a uptick in calls around baby bird season as soon as the birds are fledging, trying to come out of the nest, and everybody thinks that they need to save that baby bird when mama bird's up in the tree. Absolutely taking care of them, but they feel sorry for that bird that can't quite fly yet, but is trying to. So the other thing, folks don't often associate with the Nevada Department of Wildlife is our boating enforcement and education. Our game wardens, they are one of the smallest forces of game wardens in the United States. When you consider that spread across 110,000 square miles, it's a very small force doing a lot of work. In 2024, our game wardens contacted 1,888 vessels and assisted 81. Some of you have probably seen some of the footage of rescues that occurred. There was one of particular interest where one of our game wardens, two of our game wardens were on site on a boat accident, dove in, actually found a child that was up in an air cavity in the boat and actually saved that child and received a Coast Guard award and accommodation for that. And so they're often there. They're doing that work. If you've ever been to Lake Mead, Lake Mojave, you know how crazy that can be. And they are that DMV and NHP of the water. When you think about our boating education piece, we have seen a 20% increase in boating education certificates. And since 2018, we've seen an uptick of 187% in our boating education numbers. And last year was the first year that NDOW began offering paddle sport classes as well as kayak fishing classes. So neat stuff. One of the other accomplishments, it's the work that we've been doing for many years. People associate us working on wildlife. That also means we're working on habitats to support those wildlife. That's kind of ecosystem function, making sure that there's cover, water, those pieces for every living organism. If you think about, I've talked to this legislature before about the loss of sagebrush in the state of Nevada. Since 1986, we have lost 50% of the sagebrush in the state of Nevada, either lost or converted due to wildfire and annual invasives. And so it's a huge risk to all of those species. And so we have been leaning in for quite some time doing this work on restoration, wildfire restoration. Since 2007, in the period of 2017 to 2023, we have restored over 700,000 acres. And in fact, just this last year, we also restored another 84,000 plus acres. So we do that work. And I received this question recently as far as this picture, and I just want to highlight that yes, it is a before and after picture. I believe that's about 3 years difference in that photo. And so you can see absolutely those sagebrush skeletons that are in that slide, top slide, that show, you know, sagebrush used to be on that site. And we came in and we did some reseeding of sagebrush and perennial grasses, and that's what's coming back after our efforts. And love to say that this happens every time, but that is not always the case, and oftentimes we have to revisit some things. So moving on, wanted to talk about the bill that we're talking about here today. I'll give you a presentation. This is kind of just a very Cliff Notes overview. We'll dive deep into it shortly hereafter. Assembly Bill 59 clarifies that game wardens enforce all Nevada revised statutes. They are Category 1 peace officers and have that ability. Additionally, we're adding rabies vectors to our law outlawing intentional feeding of wildlife, very much for that case that I just laid out about urban wildlife and the number of calls. We've seen situations where coyotes are being fed one block, and the one block away we're getting people getting bitten. So we're trying to take care of that. And then also we're adding language in cooperation with Nevada Department of Agriculture to that I'll talk about later as far as chronic wasting disease. But one of the things we're doing in this bill, in this cleanup bill, is to outlaw any bodily fluids or excrement being imported into the state. Typically, this is like doe urine or things like that for cover scent for hunting, and it can be a carrier of chronic wasting disease, and so we're hypersensitive to that, and so that was one of the things we're doing. With that, I'll stand for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Director. First of all, what a great picture, because that totally reminds me of my students 80% of the time where they're like, what are you talking about? So I really appreciate the presentation and the updates. I do believe we've got a question first from Assemblymember Gurr.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Director, for the presentation. Could you go back to slide 6? Can you point out, when you say national funding, where that comes from?
Thank you, sir, Assemblyman Gurr. Again, for the record, Alan Janae. So when you look at this, and we're talking about that federal funding, is those are excise tax on guns and ammunition sale, as well as there's motorboat fuel tax in there, as well as Dingle Johnson is made up of fishing-related excise taxes, so fishing equipment.
Quick follow-up, Chair. Please. Thank you, Director. I wanted to get that on the record that only 2% of the funds that take care of your entire program that you showed here come from the general fund. The rest of it's all sportsman or sports-oriented that goes into funding your entire programs. And I just wanted that on the record. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Great. Assemblymember LaRue Hatch.
Thank you, Chair. I think that my colleague kind of hit on my question already, but my main question was just, are you being impacted by these changes in federal funding, and is that something we need to be concerned about?
Thank you for the question. For the record, Alan Janae. And so we are lucky in the sense that those federal funds that we're talking about, those wildlife and sport fish restoration funds, are non-competitive federal funds. And so because they come from guns and ammunition as well as fishing tackle sales, is that those are in a very isolated pot. As I mentioned, they're awarded, and so they're not competitive. We're not competing with other states for those. It's basically broken out by a formula allocation from the federal government. So we have not seen any delays. We have not seen any interruptions at this time. So we've been making it through. Thank you for the question.
I also have a question. It's related to the increase of, I guess, the bears in, especially in the fall this last year. We saw an increase of some more bear activity in the Washoe County area, and then I think some of our other areas as well. How often do you work with the local, I believe, police and everything? But then also, how often are you educating the public about this issue?
Thank you for the question, Chair. And I'm going to look at my little cheat sheet here because I don't know if I have the actual bear numbers. But I can tell you that we do. Yeah, I don't have it broke out by bear numbers. I apologize. I can't get you that specific number. We do track that in those calls. But we do work with every municipality. We deal with, you know, everything along the Sierra front from Douglas County, Incline Village, Lake Tahoe, Washoe County, not only to provide assistance, but also to educate. And, you know, one of the biggest things that we see and we have been trying to push local municipalities to try to adopt is guidance as far as trash management. That is the biggest piece in managing bears, is managing people and training them that if you can keep your trash cleaned up and secure, and a bear can't find it, he'll move on to other places where he can find possibly more natural sources of feed. And if you would like, I can get the absolute number back to you.
That'd be great. Assemblymember Hanson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being here. I always enjoy hearing from Endow. I don't see, could you find the slide that has the habitat restoration? On the online version, it doesn't show this slide completely, that graph. Just for the edification, especially of new members, can you explain, because a lot of times, like, we don't have a lot of trees in Nevada, why would we remove pinyon juniper? If you could explain why that's important and what those efforts do.
Thank you for the question. Again, for the record, Alan Janae. And so when we contemplate pinyon juniper work, those are kind of the natural coniferous forests that occupy Nevada in the largest expanse. But what we see is they are encroaching into traditional sagebrush habitats. And so when we contemplate the loss of sagebrush habitats, is we have two threats. We have annual invasives, which are cheatgrass and wildfire, that are pushing on one end. And as you approach the eastern side of the state, typically around Ely and places like that, is you're seeing these pinyon juniper woodlands that are expanding into these sagebrush communities. And basically, eventually, they will choke those out and convert into pinyon juniper. And so that's what it's all about, is trying to work along those edges to try to maintain those sagebrush habitats and keep that pinyon juniper under control. And I will add in this slide, and I greatly appreciate you bringing me back to this, because one of my talking points is also in the riparian, is spring meadow enhancement. Driest state in the nation, and water is probably the most important factor to wildlife distribution, and so we do a fair amount of wildlife or water protection. Some of this is fencing, some of this is actually restoration activities to try to bring back some of those sore spots that are across the landscape.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you so much for that presentation. Would you like to take a small break before starting the bill?
Small break,
Small break. We'll do a small break.
very short.
Okay. We're going to go into a small recess until I'm given the signal to come back. Maybe 1 minute. Coming back online. Thank you so much. And we will open our first bill hearing for today on AB 59, which revises provisions relating to governmental administration. Thank you, Director Janae, for staying with us. And please introduce yourself for the record whenever you are ready.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Alan Janae, Director, Nevada Department of Wildlife, and beside me is my Deputy Director, Jordan Goshert. We are here to present on Assembly Bill 59. This is what we would term as one of our agency's cleanup bills. We're trying to take care of some things that were in previous legislation, and we're trying to go back and make slight adjustments. When you look at this bill, Section 4, page 6, Section 16, page 14, we're trying to come into agreement with similar language in NRS 289-280, which clarifies that Nevada's game wardens, as Category 1 peace officers, do enforce all laws of the state. And this is the situation currently in our regulation, in our chapters. You will see that it is actually referenced as while performing the tasks of these chapters. So while enforcing either wildlife law or boating law is the constraint of that. And so we're trying to clean that up. The rationale behind this is so that they can deal with public safety risks. You can imagine a situation where if it's an action of an officer is bound by the fact that whether or not they're enforcing wildlife law or boating law at the time, it may not cover all circumstances of public safety. What we have seen in the past, if you recall the Las Vegas campus shooting, some of our officers were actually some of the first responders on that, and we're actually there looking for a suspect, a second suspect. And being on UNLV campus, I can most assuredly inform you they were not conducting wildlife or boating related enforcement. And so that may have created a loophole had there been a second suspect. Additionally, there have been other circumstances where, our officers are in rural counties, often a very key part because of the small number of people in those rural areas that are doing law enforcement. And there have been other public safety places where, murder suspects are held up, and it's an all call for all officers to try to respond, to try to get this control of this situation. And so, again, I can assure you that our wardens were not performing wildlife or boating safety enforcement at that time. And so, trying to clean up this loophole. Our wardens are, as I said, Category 1 peace officers. They go to absolutely the same training as every other Category 1 peace officer in the state, which is NHP and others like that, local county enforcement. So they have the same training, same background, and are recognized as such. And so we're just looking to clean this up. Moving on to Section 7, page 7 and 8. As I mentioned in my presentation about the department, we're looking to expand our regulation on intentional feeding to any wildlife that is classified as a wild mammal, game bird by commission. And so when you look at this on page 7 and page 8, you'll see that we've actually used some commission regulation that actually defines these classification of species because it was the cleanest way to deal with this. And this does bring in these rabies vectors, as I mentioned, like coyotes, that we are seeing the issues with in the urban interface. Moving on to Section 8, page 8 and 9, it will prohibit knowingly bringing into or possessing in the state excrement or bodily fluid of listed ungulates, and this is all around trying to get control of chronic wasting disease. It is a spongiform encephalitis, basically makes Swiss cheese of your spinal cord in cervids, and so we are currently surrounded. California just last year found chronic wasting disease in their state. Idaho has found it. Utah has it. We are pretty much surrounded by chronic wasting disease, and we are trying to get that under control in any manner possible and taking away possibilities like this. And so that was the rationale behind this change. Moving on to Section 9, page 10. This will classify moose as a trophy big game species. If you remember at the last session, we went through that process of getting the clearance for moose, and we actually initiated a hunt last year. It was a very successful hunt. 2 bull moose were harvested in the state, and that season lasted a whole whopping 6 days. And one of the cool stories, if I may, just side tangent here in a very important regulation, but one of those hunters was a first-time hunter, 12-year-old youth. First time he ever put in for a tag, and was lucky enough to draw a Nevada moose. But moving back to business, I had to brag a little, is that will take that civil penalty for killing of a moose by moving it into trophy is not less than $5,000 and not more than $30,000. And so that is to reflect that increased value of the state's value on that animal. So moving on. We are looking on page 10, section 9, we're revising the definition of an antler point. This is probably the smallest of cleanups, and we're looking to exclude the first point on the main beam of mule deer, because that is typically an eye guard. It's not counted as a main point. And so we're looking to clarify that, and that will help our law enforcement officers in the enforcement of their regulations. And then finally, as I mentioned before, we have various sections spread throughout the bill where we are trying to eliminate the alternative livestock permit program in cooperation with Nevada Department of Ag. We both have regulations around this. When we consider alternative livestock, those were previously cervidae species, which is again that group of species that carries chronic wasting disease. And in the past, that was fallow deer, reindeer. And so we're trying to make sure that those operations, that those regulations remove those opportunities to bring those possible chronic wasting species into this state. And so we have worked on both of our chapters, both with Nevada Department of Ag and now with Department of Wildlife to clean that up. And that is the summary of our bill. If you have any questions, I'll stand for those.
Thank you so much for making such a quick, succinct, to-the-point presentation. First, we do have a question from Assemblymember Hanson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. On section 16, make sure this layperson is getting it right. This is the part in regards to the designation of a game warden to kind of broaden and address some of the issues you mentioned earlier with the tragedy at UNLV and other things that might occur. I want to make sure I'm understanding as I look at, so we're going to incorporate NRS 501.337 or 501.339 to allow, by making that designation, we are going to now expand the duties of a game warden only in relationship to emergency situations? Are we expanding the abilities of game wardens in all kind of type of police matters, not just related to game? And I might have this totally mixed up, so I'm humble enough to admit that.
Thank you for the question, Assemblymember. And I will take full advantage of my humility, and I will call up my law enforcement chief, Christy Knight, to assist me because I don't have those numbers absolutely right in front of me. So 1 second, please.
Chief Game Warden Christy Knight for the record, KRISTY, Can you please repeat your question?
Sure. So in regards to trying to address the deficiencies with game wardens and other police matters, it's my understanding, the way I'm looking at section 16, that the new language incorporates NRS 501.337 or 501.339. And while I don't necessarily think we have to go to those statutes, to just ask, are we expanding the authority and the powers of game wardens in general or only in emergency situations?
Christy Knight for the record. It is not necessarily expanding their authorities at all times. It's more emergency type situations because we still need to focus on wildlife enforcement, building enforcement. So these are more for emergency type situations. Not to say that we wouldn't necessarily take action, but it's for emergency type situations.
Thank you, Chair. So for instance, if a game warden is out doing his or her duties and sees a trespass or thinks maybe this is a trespass situation somewhere remote Nevada, maybe on a ranch or whatever, does the game warden have the authority existing now to trespass that person, cite that person for trespass? Or is that only reserved for emergency situations to be able to cite for trespass?
Chief Game Warden Christy Knight for the record. We do have the authority to trespass somebody currently, as long as we are currently enforcing Title 45, so we're out there for hunting purposes. So we are able to trespass them at that time if requested.
She is a very wonderful, indulgent chair. Maybe it'd be easier to have you maybe list some of the duties that you would do in an emergency. I mean, I can only imagine with what happened at UNLV, but maybe just for the record, what are some of the duties that would be expanded in an emergency that they don't currently do?
Well, the Chief Game Warden Christy Knight for the record. So the problem that we're trying to bring in for coverage for our wardens is, and we've been questioned on this before, is we've seen a DUI in front of us, or what we anticipated was a DUI, made the stop, made the arrest, then it got to court and they were saying we were not enforcing Title 45 or 488 at that time. However, during the discussions, they decided that we were, but that was part of the argument about it, was we weren't actually, because we were just driving along the highway at the time. We were not off-road or anything like that. So it's trying to make sure that we can still do public safety type stuff in emergency type situations. A DUI person on the road is a public safety emergency type situation. But we have been on active shooters. We did find the murder suspect from Fish Springs here. And we have been on active shooters in Elko and other remote areas. So we do want to do more things in emergency type situations like that, cover officers, not to just go enforce law, traffic or anything like that. We don't have the manpower, nor is that our goal or our focus, as you saw from our mission statement.
Thank you, that was very helpful, appreciate it.
Thank you. Assemblymember Considine.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, if you wanted to stay, kind of my questions are along the same vein, because that was a suspected DUI in your example. So I just want to flesh that out a little bit more. So are you saying when a warden is in uniform or at any time 24/7 if they see an emergency? Because that, I understand in emergencies like shootings, you could be in your regular gear, you automatically react to it. But if it's a drive on a weekend when you're not in that, are you still saying that you want to expand this for someone to pull somebody over when they're suspected of something?
Chief Game Warden Christy Knight for the record. If they are not in uniform capacity or in a marked unit, they wouldn't be able to pull somebody over anyways because they can't pull them over. They could possibly take action if there was a domestic going on in front of them to pull them apart or something like that. At this time, we cannot. Off-duty, we can only enforce Title 45 or 488, NRS 488, while off-duty. So we couldn't even step in. We could only be a witness and watch somebody possibly be beat in front of us.
Thank you. Thank you for that explanation. Now I just sort of lost where I was going with that. I'm so sorry. Because I completely understand what you're saying. So does that mean that if you're opening up from just Title 45, does that mean it's to everything? Everything and anything? I'm not sure. I'm not well versed enough to know what all of these NRS is, everything that's in the NRS. But is this in certain emergency situations, you become a police officer in duty?
Chief Game Warden Christy Knight for the record. We are in essence a police officer. We just have direction towards wildlife and boating enforcement. So by statute, we are Category 1 peace officers, which means we can do any state law, but as it's written currently, it's while we're enforcing Title 45 and 488. So it's not that we want to go take those actions, especially off-duty. It's that we are covered if we do take those actions and something does happen.
Last one, sorry. So I guess I'm just trying to walk a line between your duty and your feelings of your duty and an expectation from the community that you step in certain situations. So that's why I was asking those questions. Thank you.
And there is Chief Game Warden Christy Knight for the record. There is an expectation because we do have a badge on our door. We do have law enforcement on our truck. So there is an expectation for us to step in situations, and we do limit how much we do.
Thank you. Assemblymember DeLong.
Thank you, Chair. I actually have two questions. Thank you. First one has to do with section 7, and I just want to make sure we're not inadvertently making grandma do something illegal. Lots of people have feeders in their yards that feed birds, maybe even quail. Quail may be a game species. I'm not quite sure about those regulations, but squirrels get fed too. Are we potentially making that illegal?
So thank you for the question. For the record, Alan Janae. So that was one of the things we considered in this, was we definitely don't want to be interrupting grandma or the urban, bird feeders. This is about trying to get to that point, and in that mix of species, there are some game species, and quail falls in that. But our intent is definitely not to go after somebody who is working a urban bird feeder, and by happenstance, is feeding black-capped chickadees and house sparrows, and a quail comes along and eats some of the feed that's on the ground. That is not the intent. This is a situation to deal with, as I described before, we've got circumstances where people are attracting coyotes into communities on one hand, and then we're dealing with the attacks on another. The other situation is we have had intentional feeding to draw trophy species onto private lands for harvest. And so it's to try to deal with that circumstance, or as we've seen on our urban interface, is people feeding bears, attracting them into those circumstances. And so our intent is definitely not to deal with bird feeders.
And I assumed that, and I'm assuming you've said you won't do that, but I'm worried about, okay, we're putting in statute, 20 years down the road, no one's gonna remember this hearing, and we get a very aggressive enforcement situation, and we might be arresting grandma. So that's that question. The second one, if I may, Chair, is on 8, the bodily fluid one. That's a very comprehensive statement, none. What about someone that's getting a biology degree, maybe a PhD or a master's in wildlife, and they are collecting urine or blood as part of their research?
Thank you for the question, Alan Janae, for the record. And so that type of circumstances, if they're dealing with wildlife, they actually have to have a permit to handle wildlife from Nevada Department of Wildlife. And so at that point, we would absolutely know that they are dealing with bodily fluids, and we could absolutely address that circumstance with them. And again, as I alluded to, is right now we're surrounded and we're clean. We're clean in the state of Nevada, and so probably handling the animals within the state, much lower risk is more the importation of bodily fluids from out of state is the primary concern, and the biggest of those that we're just trying to clean up is it's not used a whole lot in the state of Nevada. It's much more kind of a whitetail thing as using doe urine for cover scent. You don't see it much, but it does come into some of our sporting goods stores, and we'd like to just make sure that's clean.
I was aware that a permit's necessary for that, but this doesn't have an exemption for, you can't have it unless you have a permit. So, just reading this section, you wouldn't be able to do that research if you were getting those materials from outside the state.
Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up, because that actually does bring up something for me as well. Sporting goods stores are able to bring in things at this time? Is that what I understand, what your answer just stated? Some of these items
Thank you
are
for the,
out-
thank
if
you for the
can
record.
Clarify that.
To clarify, currently, yes, there are no restrictions on bringing in bodily fluids or excrement into this state. And so that's what this is to do, is to clean up that piece so that there's no opportunity for possible CWD urine being used in this state. And the one thing I'll allude to or try to provide a little bit of clarification on is chronic wasting disease. And luckily, we have Director Gogachia here, who is a vet and can probably clean up my biological speak if necessary. But chronic wasting disease is actually a protein chain. It is not even a living being. It is simply a protein chain. And so once it is on the ground, it can actually move through the soil and be transported through a plant that could be consumed by an animal that could actually convey and pass this chronic wasting disease into this animal. And so that's why there's so much nervousness around this, is that you could see a possibility of this doe urine ending up on the ground and then possibly facilitating the movement into wildlife, into cervidae. Thank you.
Just a beacon of hope, aren't you? Thank you, though, for that clarification. Next up, Assemblymember Karas, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question is just some clarification, because it seems to me you're bouncing back and forth between definitions, and I'm probably wrong, so I want you to explain it to me. In Section 1, page 3, line 3, you use big game mammal, right? And then you go to Section 7, page 7, line 30, and you cross out big game mammal and go to wildlife. I'm assuming because you're adding birds to it, but I'm not sure. And then you revert back to big game trophy big game mammal in Section 9, page 10. Tell me how this makes sense.
I greatly appreciate the question, because if it's causing you confusion, it's going to cause a lot of other people confusion. And so when you look at Section 1, it does describe big game mammal, means any game mammal so classified by the commission regulation. And so that pushes you to NAC where that is defined. Going back to, I believe it was page 7, you asked about, we struck out big game mammal, because in wildlife classified as wild mammal and game bird, that is actually more inclusive of wild mammal includes those rabies vectors, which is coyotes. And so that's the difference between big game mammal and wild mammal. And those are all in NAC defined by the Board of Wildlife Commission. And the final one you had, whereas when we were talking about trophy big game, that is a classification that is for the civil penalties assigned in a violation. I'm trying to look for the exact spot. Did you have the page again, if I may? Page 10. Thank you. Yeah, so as used in this section, trophy big game mammal, so it is then again described here. And so we added moose, because this section 8 on page 10 is defining what the trophy big game mammal is. So all of those have definitions, and I know probably to somebody who doesn't participate in the sport, and I'm just assuming, is that probably doesn't make a difference to you, but yeah, those words matter, and they are defined, and this trophy big game mammal is defined in this section here, and the others are all defined in NAC. Hopefully
Thank
that
you.
helped. Thank
I
you.
don't hunt, but I know many people who do, but words do matter, you're correct. So thank you for clarifying. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Assemblymember Gurr. Well, never mind for Assemblymember Gurr. Assemblymember LaRue Hatch.
Thank you, Chair. And actually, many of my questions did get answered. I did have concerns about the feeders, and I did want to make sure we are writing those protections in, because I do think quail especially is a great example of many that come in and profit from the bird feeders.
Please.
If I may, for the record, Alan Janae, I just wanted to clarify, and that was, I missed an opportunity with Assemblymember DeLong, was that the first instance in this regulation is a warning. And so it'll be an assessment, it'll be a conversation with an individual, and as I said, our wardens are not there to harass grandma over running her bird feeders, but in those circumstances where it seems like they may be attracting these game species for possible intent, or dealing with bears or dealing with coyotes, in every instance, first offense is a warning. And so it's just a matter of education at that point. Thank you for the opportunity.
Separate question, if your question is about that.
Assemblymember Hanson has a follow-up to that question.
Thank you for keeping it fluid. Just an idea that popped in my head, which could be dangerous. Is there a way maybe I think because some of us are feeling a little bit of, it's just too broad. And I know the intention is not to go after people that have a nice little bird feeder hanging in their yard. Is there a way we could structure the language to say, designate the display of that bird feeder? If it's in a yard that's, in a residential neighborhood, or maybe even if the bird feeder occurs in an area where shooting is already outlawed, something like that?
I'll let you answer.
Thank you. I will venture is the scope of this, again, sorry for the record, Alan Janae. The scope of this regulation is actually trying to address many different fronts, and so bird feeders are a piece of it. You could actually deal with, if you're familiar with many back east places, is you have intentional feeders, which are to attract big game. That's one circumstances, but also in contemplation of sometimes these situations, despite not being about the harvest, is about the attractive nuisance of the feed being there, which is the situation more to bears, more to coyotes, is providing that food opportunity to that animal so that they come into that neighborhood. And somebody may enjoy seeing them, but they may be creating havoc next door. So I do appreciate the sentiment, and we will take a look back and contemplate this. We did spend a fair amount of time on trying to look at this, the bird feeder piece, and I think the intent is to absolutely stay away from grandma's bird feeder.
Thank you for that, because I know that you've spent a large amount of time on all of this cleanup bill, cleanup bills always creates other things. So I'm just wondering if there's a possibility of maybe working with the two assembly members and possibly finding a solution that would be acceptable for you, and then also a little bit more understanding of grandma who's out there feeding the chipmunks, who then attracts the bears, it sounds like. So, next question, I believe Assemblymember LaRue Hatch had a separate question.
Thank you, Chair. My other question is the part we haven't talked about much, which is the alternative livestock. I just wondered if you, and this may be a Department of Ag question, just how many of those permits have been issued, and how much of an impact is this gonna have on folks?
Thank you for the question. For the record, Alan Janae, and I am more than willing to share the floor.
Assembly member, thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to the Assembly member. Thanks for the phone a friend, buddy. Yeah, so alternative lives, Director Goykochir for the record. Alternative livestock must be permitted through the Nevada Department of Agriculture. Several sessions ago, we actually came forward when we started working on chronic wasting, and at that time made the determination we were not going to allow any more of those into the state. So we have 0 alternative livestock permitted in the state, 0 captive cervidae permitted in the state. There will be no impact.
All right, thank you so much. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for the presentation. And we will now go into testimony. As a reminder, Please remember to clearly state and spell your name for the record. Testify in support if you support the bill in its entirety. Testify in opposition if you oppose even one little tiny thing in the bill, even if it's just a very small thing. Testify in neutral. If you're not taking a position, you're just providing us with information. Please limit testimony to 2 minutes. And we also ask that you avoid repeating testimony made by previous speakers. And call-in information can be found on the agenda. All right, let's start off with some testimony support of AB 59 here in Carson City.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Kyle Davis, here today on behalf of the Coalition for Nevada's Wildlife. We are here in support of this bill. We do urge its passage. Chronic wasting disease is the biggest threat that our Nevada wildlife faces, and the provisions contained in Section 8, 25, 27, and the associated changes in law that deal with the bodily fluids and, make sure that we completely eliminate the alternative livestock program. All of these are important steps that we need to take to make sure that we are safeguarding Nevada's wildlife. So we absolutely encourage this bill for those reasons. We also want to make sure to point out that we do think it is an appropriate thing to move the classification of moose into a trophy big game animal, so that we make sure that we have the appropriate penalties in place if someone were to poach a moose in Nevada. So thank you for your time. Be happy to answer any questions.
Afternoon, Chair and committee members. My name is James Mortimer, for the record, Mortimore, and I'm the Vice President of the Nevada Police Union, representing state law enforcement across Nevada. I'm here today on behalf of all state game wardens who are represented by the Nevada Police Union, and we are here in full support of this bill, and we urge you to support this bill. Thank you.
Anybody here in Tahoe, in Carson City in support? Seeing none. Anybody in Las Vegas or Elko? Seeing none. AVH, is there anybody that would like to call in?
Chair, there are currently no callers on the line for testimony.
Next, we will move testimony in opposition of this bill. Is there anybody here in Carson City? Seeing none. Anybody in Las Vegas or Elko? AVH, has anybody jumped onto the phones?
Chair, nobody has joined the line.
Let's go on to neutral. Carson City, Las Vegas, Elko, and then also phones.
Chair, there are still no callers to provide testimony.
Thank you so much. This concludes the testimony on the bill. Would you like to make any closing remarks after you get your mint?
Thank you. For the record, Director Alan Janae, Nevada Department of Wildlife. I just want to thank the committee for the opportunity to present this bill, and I really appreciate all the questions that we received, and we will absolutely look into those that we committed to, and thank you very much.
Thank you. I will now close the hearing on Assembly Bill 59 to move on to the hearing on Assembly Bill 85, which authorizes the management of designated invertebrates. I believe our bill presenters are making their way at this time. Assemblymember Watts, when you are ready, please introduce yourself for the record when, again, you are ready.
All right. Good afternoon, evening. Chair, members of the committee, for the record, Howard Watts, representing Assembly District 15 in Clark County. It's my pleasure to present Assembly Bill 85 for your consideration today. I am joined by Kevin Burles with the Xerces Society. He is going to walk through a brief presentation to elevate the issue that we're trying to address with this bill. After that, I will walk you through the bill itself, make a couple of other remarks, and then we're glad to take any questions that you have. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Burles.
Thank you, Assemblymember Watts, Chair Anderson, members of the committee. Kevin Burles, for the record, Kevin Burls, representing the Xerxes Society for Invertebrate Conservation. Our mission is to protect the natural world through the conservation of invertebrates and their habitats. Though our organization is based out of Portland, I live with my family just up the road in Washoe Valley, where I moved almost to the Northern Nevada area almost 20 years ago, graduated from the University of Nevada, Reno in 2014. Grateful to have the chance to talk about this issue with you all again. You may recall a similar version of this bill was introduced last session and received unanimous bipartisan support from this committee. The insects of Nevada are an important piece of our state's wildlife community, an amazingly diverse natural heritage, and they are also a vital natural resource. Nevada boasts over 1,000 species of native bees, including 20 species of bumblebees, a significant group of crop-pollinating insects that's almost 40% of the total number of bumblebee species found in the United States. These bees, butterflies, and other insects are present in all of Nevada's landscapes, from city parks and backyard gardens to the tallest peaks and to the edges of alkaline playas. These insects, small though they are, serve as the foundation for healthy and productive landscapes in our state, and they support many important economic activities. In addition to supporting the production of many important Nevada crops, including things like alfalfa seed and melons, and on a smaller scale, yours and mine, homegrown tomatoes, approximately 75% of the over 3,000 species of native wildflowers found in Nevada require some sort of insect assistance to reproduce. These flowering plants, produced by pollinators, are a vital resource for numerous wild and domesticated animals. Just a couple quick examples. Wildflowers and shrubs can comprise anywhere between 20 and 45% of cattle diets for animals on rangelands. These wildflowers and shrubs are key sources of crude protein, digestible nutrients, and key minerals for livestock, sometimes providing the quality and minerals at levels greater than key forage grasses. In addition to pollination, invertebrates on rangelands are critical food sources for many other species of wildlife, including grassland birds such as sage grouse, which rely nearly exclusively on rangeland insects like caterpillars as food for the first few weeks of their lives. These invertebrate species support a resilient food web, provide other beneficial services such as pest control, decomposition, and improved soil health. Last but not least, these insects and the plants they support are a large part of what make Nevada's landscapes so stunningly beautiful and provide such enjoyment for those who venture out to experience the natural wonders of our state. Unfortunately, the evidence is clear that insects as a group are in decline across the globe, and unfortunately, Nevada is no exception. The population decline of the monarch butterfly has been well documented, and unfortunately, this last winter, our western overwintering populations experienced their second lowest numbers ever, with only a little over 9,000 adults counted in total. In addition, it seems like the monarch is only a canary in the coal mine. Recent research, including faculty at the University of Nevada, Reno, has found many butterfly species are in decline, with approximately 1 in 5 butterflies disappearing in the last 2 decades. While we have the best data on butterflies, other work on bumblebees has revealed many of these animals appear to be gone from much of their former ranges as well. This is an important issue to Nevada citizens, with over 3/4 of Nevadans recognizing pollinator loss as a serious problem in a 2020 poll. This means that Nevadans recognize this is an issue that affects all of us and that we need to work together to protect our state's most vulnerable bees, butterflies, and other insects. Current Nevada Revised Code does not define invertebrates as wildlife, as it does mammals, birds, reptiles, and other vertebrate species. This means that the Department of Wildlife does not have the regulatory or management authority to help or conserve insects we know are in steep decline, such as the large marble butterfly seen here. The agency is unable to act to help these species recover, leaving them at risk of needing federal protection under the Endangered Species Act to prevent their extinction. Assembly Bill 85 would define non-pest invertebrate wildlife species of greatest conservation need as wildlife under Nevada Revised Code, allowing the Department of Wildlife to work to conserve and recover the populations and their habitats just as they do for other animals. And I've highlighted non-pest here. I know many of us are very fond of Mormon crickets. I don't expect that you'll see them on this list. This specifically gives the Department of Wildlife the ability to manage species that appear on this list, that is, species of greatest conservation need that exists within the State Wildlife Action Plan. There are currently 66 species of bees and butterflies on this list, including the animals seen here on the right, which can be revised. This list can be revised by the Nevada Department of Wildlife and is every 10 years or so. Conservation actions by the Department of Wildlife can effectively recover vulnerable wildlife populations, reducing the need to include these species under the Endangered Species Act. Because the Nevada Department of Wildlife controls wildlife permits and fees for wildlife management, this bill does require a 2/3 vote in the Assembly and the Senate. This bill does provide funding to carry out this important work, but I'd like to point out a few things it does not do. It does not impose permitting on invertebrates or fees on agriculture or other activities, does not designate any endangered species or institute any new protections or provisions for invertebrates. This bill simply allows the Department of Wildlife to act to conserve insects that appear on their list of species of greatest conservation need, including the Morrison bumblebee here on the right, and below that is the aptly named Great Basin small blue butterfly, so that these insects can continue to support Nevada's productive and healthy landscapes. That's why we ask you today to recognize the importance of Nevada's insects and vote in favor of AB 85, allowing the Nevada Department of Wildlife to manage these invertebrate species of greatest conservation need. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burrows. Howard Watts for the record. First of all, I just want to note the strong cross-state collaboration between the University of Nevada, Reno and the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Unity is possible. Now I will walk you briefly through the bill, and then I will close with a few additional remarks. So Section 2 and Section 3 are really the crux of the bill. Section 2 discusses what a designated invertebrate is. You'll notice this isn't as fun to talk about as bees and butterflies, but when we talk about those, you'll see why that's really what this bill is about. So again, this mentions non-pests. We want to make sure, first of all, pests, insect species are dealt with by the Department of Agriculture. So we want to make sure that there's a clear delineation there. Also, we're not interested in doing conservation work on pest species. So that's why that is in there. And then we note that they have to be a species of greatest conservation need in the State Wildlife Action Plan. In other words, they have to have been identified as a species that needs help. And as was noted, the species that are currently listed, there's 66 of them. I think 42 are butterflies, and I'm pretty sure all the rest are bees. So we're talking about bees and butterflies. Section 3 just describes what the State Wildlife Action Plan is that's compiled by the Department of Wildlife. And then Section 5 and 6 are, I think, really the critical pieces. These are essentially adding those designated invertebrates into the definition of wildlife. The rest of the bill just makes conforming changes where wildlife is discussed to make sure that they are included in our wildlife statutes the same as any other type of wildlife, mammals, amphibians, reptiles, fish, etc., etc. So as Mr. Burrows noted, this bill does have a 2/3 requirement on it. The similar version or almost identical version of this bill from last session also did. I asked the Legislative Council Bureau about it, and I think many of you are familiar, may have had some of these issues yourselves, but whenever we expand the potential scope of an existing fee, that triggers a 2/3 requirement. And so NRS 502.240 provides both the authority to the Department of Wildlife to charge special permit fees if a species was fully protected, and licenses for hunting, etc. Again, nothing under this contemplates hunting of bees and butterflies. However, by including them under wildlife, however unlikely that is, it expands the potential species that those fees could be covered by, and that is what leads to the 2/3 on it. Again, nothing in this requires any of that, that all falls to the Department of Wildlife and the State Wildlife, Board of Wildlife Commissioners in terms of adopting any regulations. I just want to reinforce, I know there were questions last session around the scope, and we really wanted to make sure that the scope is very clear and narrowed. We're not talking, so while technically this can apply to other invertebrates or insects, I think when you look at the State Wildlife Action Plan, you see where that need is. It's with those bees and those butterflies. It's 66 species. I know that there are thousands and thousands of species of insects out there. We're talking about those 66, 42 of which are butterflies. It was mentioned this doesn't touch any other regulations and is not meant to touch any other authority. I've gotten a couple questions about honeybees. There were excellent pictures provided by Mr. Burrows in the presentation. I hope you enjoyed them. Many different bees. None of those are honeybees. So there's an entire other chapter of statute that deals with regulations related to beekeeping. This does not touch that at all. Honeybees are not one of the bees that are listed in the State Wildlife Action Plan and are not going to be. This is focused on those native species that are here out in the environment. I also want to note, we've had some conversations with the Department of Agriculture. They do have a pollinator program, so we're talking through things with them. There might need to be some adjustments to the language. We're also just working to make sure all the agencies come together and that we have a shared understanding of the responsibilities. We don't intend to step on the toes of anything that the Department of Agriculture is doing. We just want to make sure that we have all the tools available in the state toolbox to address this. And that's really what I really want to close with. The goal of this is to have Nevada positioned to be proactive and to drive locally led solutions to protect these species. If we do not, a few of these species that are listed in this are petitioned or listed under the Endangered Species Act. We know that that comes with significant rules, regulations dictated from the federal government. I don't know why we would have Nevada remain one of 12 states that handcuffs the state from taking action that can actually prevent that and keep everything within the control of our state and our local experts on the ground. If the feds and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service can take action to protect insects, we should be able to do the same before it ever gets to that point. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for your time, and we're glad to take any questions you may have.
Great, thank you so much for the presentation. Love the pictures. Assemblymember DeLong, we do have a few questions for you.
Thank you, Chair. I think it may only be one this time. All right, okay, I'll have 10. Thanks for the presentation, informative. So you're including the state's wildlife action plan in the bill. You indicated that the plan currently identifies, what was it, 60 some odd species of invertebrates that the department believes is in need of some level of management. Does that plan also identify what they would do if they had the authority?
Howard Watts for the record. I believe, I think it's probably best that we have the Department of Wildlife come up in neutral and provide additional clarity on that, as they are the experts on the ground. I don't want to misspeak.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and so if possible, when the department comes up, we can ask that question, if you're comfortable with that, Assemblymember. Assemblymember Kasama.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just curious, so it's mainly butterflies and bees, but not honeybees, is that correct, that is kind of identified here?
Howard Watts for the record, yes, that is correct. Now, theoretically, there could be some other insect that's added, but again, that's driven by the biologists and experts at the Department of Wildlife having to identify that species is in need of conservation. But right now, everything that they've identified is a species of butterfly or a bee. And again, that's really, we're talking about bumblebees primarily. There are some other bee species, but not honeybees.
Follow up? So with that group, is there, I'm just curious to understand what brought this bill. Have people been trying to destroy the butterflies or the bees, or has there been, what's been causing destruction of them that prompts the bill?
Thank you very much for that question. Howard Watts for the record. There are a lot of things that are impacting these populations. Habitat loss, habitat degradation are the main ones. Some pesticides and chemicals have also been linked to playing a role in that. I think to answer your question about what really brought the bill forward, it was, I mean, again, there are first of all, species of butterflies that are listed under the Endangered Species Act. The Mount Charleston blue butterfly is one that comes immediately to mind. I believe there are others. There are roughly 100 of these species listed nationally under the Endangered Species Act. And what the issue was is that we realized that Nevada, again, is one of a handful of states, a minority of states, that does not allow our Department of Wildlife, who would normally, again, the Department of Wildlife doesn't just manage big game species. They're managing a whole range of species, including ones that are kind of at risk. And our goal as a state is, if we find that out, that we go and take some action on the front end to try and alleviate that. There's a lot more collaboration, a lot more flexibility than getting to the point of an endangered species listing. And so it was really those two things coming together. There have been some recent stories, and we can provide those as follow-up, of species being petitioned for listing under the Endangered Species Act. And so we want to figure out, how can we get in front of that and avoid that? Because that's not good for the species, for those who care about them, but also for those who are interested in developing different projects. It's not good for them to deal with a potential endangered species listing.
So it's not due to any intentional, it's more unintentional things that are happening naturally.
Howard Watts for the record. Yes, that's correct. There's there's not one cause. There's a range of factors that have impacted the populations of these animals. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Assemblymember Hanson.
Thank you, Chair. And if it's okay, I do have a couple questions. One's pretty quick. How many other states have management of invertebrates through the Department of Wildlife or whatever agency?
Thank you for that question. Howard Watts for the record. So according to a New York Times article from 2023, Nevada is one of 12 states that does not have management authority. So let's see, 38 states do. Hopefully my math is correct. And again, that was that's the most recent information that I have from 2 years ago.
Just a follow-up on that. When we say the other states have it, is it in this form?
Howard Watts for the record. I won't say that it's every state's statutes are different, but many other states either in statute or by regulation do explicitly include insects, invertebrates entirely. Even we have some of the aquatic invertebrates, but not bees and butterflies. So it does vary. And I will say, even of those 12 states, some of them are like ours and explicitly just have them not included, which I think if you're not included, you're kind of assumed to be deliberately left out. And a couple of those other states is just extremely unclear. And
I did.
Thank you.
Oh,
We're going to move on
okay.
to the Mr. Assemblymember DeLong, and then I'll have a question that will be maybe that.
Thank you, Chair. Of those, and this question may have to go to Endow in neutral, but I'll ask it here anyway. Of those 60 some odd species, are there maps that show where those species occur within the state.
Howard Watts for the record. I do think you'll get some additional clarity, but there is definitely survey work that goes on, identification of habitat and areas where these species are. The Division of Natural Heritage within the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources compiles that information for all species, including those that are federally listed, to make sure that we know where those are, as well as others that are designated as conservation need. This bill does not contemplate changing any of that. They are really kind of the repository of that type of information. But I guess the short answer would be yes.
Thank you so much for that. And I just have one last question for either you or for Mr. Burles, because I know that you've been involved in this study for some time. Is there any sort of federal programs that we could possibly utilize to also help us either with the tracking or with the funding?
Kevin Burles for the record. Thank you, Chair, for the question. Yes, there are federal funds that are available to help restore populations of species that are threatened and endangered, or not threatened or endangered yet, but are known to be in decline and may need protection. And those funds are available to a state agency that has the authority to manage invertebrates. And they can be used for actions like including habitat restoration, which I know the director talked about extensively in the presentation. And they can also be used for other assets that can be used to help recover those populations.
Thank you. Assemblymember Hanser has one last question. I've been promised it'll be less than 20 seconds, though.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, it was my first question. I got distracted. So when we deal with Mormon crickets, when we need to do an abatement of those because we know, those of us especially that travel in the northeast part of the state, is there a concern that any abatement that we might do in the future, if this bill were to pass, that we might run into some problems with the types of abatement programs they use or chemicals that would be an added layer that would help, kind of inhibit our ability to take care of this really invasive pest?
Thank you for that question. Howard Watts for the record. I think that's an excellent question. I'll answer it with a couple of things briefly. One is, as I mentioned before, we do not want to step on the toes of the Department of Agriculture or others who would be taking those efforts. So if there is something that we need to do to clarify that, we can do that. But I think while we're building the legislative record of intent, I want to make it clear that that's not our goal. And I think when others come up, they might be able to speak to the idea that if they're taking those actions, I think the goal would be that there's be some conversation and that there's some knowledge of what's going on, but that things like that would not be interfered with. And then the last piece I want to say is, if in that area we don't do anything and that species is listed under the Endangered Species Act, then there has to be a take permit in order to do those exact same actions. And that is a nightmare. So again, that's the ultimate goal that we're trying to do, is to avoid getting to that point.
Thank you for bringing up that important area. So thank you so much. I think we'll be ready for testimony in support. Thank you. If you are here to testify in support, please come on up to the table. We'll actually start in Vegas because there is somebody coming up to the table, so I'm very excited about that. So we will start with the individual in Vegas.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Anderson and members of the committee. My name is Jana Moan, and that's Jainamoan, and I'm the Nevada External Affairs Director for the Nature Conservancy. We are here testifying in support of AB 85. Invertebrates are a critical part of ecosystems, and they are integral to food webs. Invertebrate diversity is vast. In fact, the number of beetle species alone exceeds the total number of vertebrate species. But this diversity is threatened by climate change and loss of habitat. We support the management of invertebrate animals in support of healthy natural systems in Nevada. Currently, the Nevada Department of Agriculture and the Nevada Division of Natural Heritage have programs to address aspects of invertebrate management. We support Assembly Bill 85 because we believe in the value of managing designated invertebrates for conservation for the greater health of Nevada ecosystems that aligns with the Nevada Department of Wildlife's mission. Given the complexities of invertebrate management, we encourage future coordination among agencies to ensure that different management efforts are complementary and reinforcing. Ultimately, AB 85 brings more tools to manage the delicate balance of the state ecosystems. We thank the bill's sponsors for bringing the bill forward, and we urge your support for the bill. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in Las Vegas? Seeing the camera not swivel to anybody else, we'll start here in Carson.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Olivia Tanager. I'm the director of the Sierra Club's Toyabe chapter. We are the largest grassroots environmental organization in the state of Nevada, representing over 40,000 members and supporters statewide. I'm proud to be here in support of AB 85, and I thank the bill sponsor for bringing this bill back. As you heard today, most states can actively work to recover imperiled species, but Nevada can't. When state wildlife agencies proactively protect and recover imperiled species, they can help avoid the need to list them under the Endangered Species Act. NDOW is unable currently to manage and conserve these at-risk insect species that you heard today, including the monarch butterfly, pollinators under consideration for ESA protection. For other wildlife species, such as the greater sage grouse, NDOW has been able to proactively engage in conservation planning and on-the-ground efforts in our state. I did want to read a quote from the 2022 State Wildlife Action Plan, where it says, "This gap in management authority for terrestrial invertebrates creates concern that certain groups of species may be declining in the absence of quantifiable status assessments, and these knowledge gaps will prevent the conservation and stewardship of the species." Currently, with NDOW being unable to manage and conserve insect species, we leave their fate solely up to the federal government, namely the Fish and Wildlife Service. And I know that's a fate we'd all like to prevent. Invertebrates are so important to our state's economy and so important to our state's habitats, and we believe strongly that this is a common sense solution to reach their protection. Thank you.
Please.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christy Cabrera-Georgeson. I'm the Deputy Director of the Nevada Conservation League. We're here in support of AB 85 and would like to echo a lot of the comments previously made. As you've heard, insects are critical to Nevada's biodiversity, habitat, general web of wildlife, and it's important that we give NDOW the tools to properly manage them and address any threats. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair and members of the Commission. Jeff Rogan, Jeffrogan, on behalf of Clark County. Clark County also supports AB 85. Species listings under the Endangered Species Act can impede economic development in Southern Nevada, particularly home building. One of the ways in which we manage that in Southern Nevada is through the Clark County Multiple Species Habitat Conservation Plan, which hopefully prevents the additional listing of species in Southern Nevada on the Endangered Species Act and allows us to have that incidental take permit that was mentioned by Assemblyman Watts. This bill would allow further conservation efforts to go forward and hopefully prevent additional species being listed and also allow us to continue with those economic development activities in Clark County. So thank you to Assemblyman Watts for bringing this forward again.
This is my first time. All right. Thank you, Chair and Committee, for listening to this. My name is Lorraine Fitzhugh, L-O-R-R-A-I-N-E, Fitzhugh, F as in Frank, I-T-Z-H-U-G-H. I'm a retired math and computer science teacher at Douglas High School. I'm a local, now small business owner called Vital Bee Buds. For my balance, my hobby, I would always have toes in the grass and started to intensely learn through Xerxes Pollinator Partnership, and including those organizations that are in the bill, and many others that pollinators were declining. And this, for me, started about 2 decades ago. The mission is pollinators' favorite forage, enhancing harvests, habitat, and health. So through this work in over the course of the last 4 years, I've learned in the field, I'm daily working with, I would say, many invertebrates, and are connecting native perennials to the habitat to make sure that when I take the plants to market that I am helping restore habitat. So just a couple of suggestive,
You did great, but unfortunately, you're just about to the end of your 2 minutes. But the
It's
good
okay.
news is you can always put more information in by sending us information through Nellis.
Okay,
You have
thank
up to
you.
24 hours to do so.
No problem.
Thank you.
All right, thank you everybody to hearing me. My name is Chris Hulsh, ChrisHalschh. I'm a scientist currently employed actually by the state of New York, although I got my PhD at UNR. And I'm representing myself in this. And I have dedicated much of the last 10 years of my life to actually studying the challenges or the causes of insect decline across the world, and actually with a focus here in the Western US. I was told that saying like ditto is okay. And basically everything that Kevin Burrell's already said is very much supported by the science. I do kind of want to take this opportunity to just convey what the scale is of insects and what we're talking about here. If you counted up every living thing on Earth that has a name, the majority of those things are insects, more than everything else put together. They are fundamental to pollination, as is always talked about, but they're decomposers, they're food. Bird declines have been tied to declines in insects, and all birds, even if you don't end up eating insects as an adult, depend on them at a certain point. And the rate of declines, especially in the West, are actually quite alarming. A number that's been published is an annual rate of 2% in abundance per year, which compounded over decades can end up being 20, 30, 40% of previously recorded diversity. These things need to be managed, and waiting until it gets listed federally is probably the least efficient thing we can possibly do. So with that, that's all I got. So thank you.
Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, Matt Forrester, F-O-R-I-S-T-E-R. I'm a professor at the University of Nevada, Reno, although I'm here on my own behalf. So I'm not representing the university, but I want to say just a word about what we do there. In my research group, which is students and colleagues, we study factors impacting insects in Nevada in particular and throughout the West. And as you've heard, the issues are serious. And much of what we do is done in collaboration with agencies. We work with Fish and Wildlife, and by doing that, I can train students, undergraduates and graduate students, for good careers working for insects and for biodiversity. And so this bill would open up new opportunities for us to work with NDOW in support of Nevada's insects. And so I'm here in strong support. Thank you.
Anyone else here in Carson City see somebody coming up to the table?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Greg Smith for the record, G-R-E-G S-M-I-T-H. Thank you. I'm here on behalf of the Great Basin Wildlife Conservancy. We're kind of a new group, but we do have many members. And I'm here to urge you in support of this bill. It's a good bill, and our members would support it on behalf of all wildlife. Thank you.
Before you leave, it's nice to see you again, Assemblymember Smith. Thank you for coming forward. Anyone else who would like to speak in support? See nobody else in Vegas. We've already gone there. Anybody online?
Testify in support of Assembly Bill 85. Please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue.
Good evening, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Tara Webster, T-A-R-A-W-E-B-S-T-E-R. I'm the policy manager with the Progressive Leadership Alliance of Nevada, calling in support of AB 85. Outside of my policy work with PLAN, many know me as a biologist, an educator, and an environmental advocate. I'm proud to have spent more than a decade as a science educator and graduate student at UNR, where I was fortunate to research my favorite species here in northern Nevada, the common buckeye butterfly, aka Junonia senia, which would be protected under this bill. As we see more growth and development in our great state, we must take a holistic look at how we manage natural invertebrate habitats and protect these fragile ecosystems. Through navigating limited water supply, extractive industries, sprawl, and increased land grabs across Nevada, we must continue to ensure that we're placing people and planet first. Thank you, Dr. Kevin Burles, for helping foster my love for butterflies many years ago, and thank you, Assemblymember Watts, for introducing this important legislation that addresses the protection and recovery of fragile invertebrate ecosystems. On behalf of PLAN, we urge your support for AB 85. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other callers?
Chair, there are no additional callers for testimony at this time.
Thank you. We'll now move into opposition. Would anybody like to come to the table to testify in opposition? Seeing nobody in Vegas, seeing nobody coming to Carson, and let's see if there's anybody on the phones.
There are no additional callers for testimony.
Let's move to neutral. Anybody here in Carson? Nobody in Vegas? Same thing for the phones, I'm thinking. Oh, excuse me.
Yes, Chair.
I will ask if possible if the department will come on up, not in testimony, but to be able to possibly answer a few questions that we have. I believe there was one from from Assemblymember DeLong, and then there's also one from Vice Chair LaRue Hatch, if you are comfortable answering those questions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. For the record, Alan Janae, Director, Nevada Department of Wildlife, and here I've got Jasmine Kleiber, our Biodiversity Administrator, and we will do our best to answer the questions that were provided. And with that, I will absolutely pass to the expert, which is Administrator Kleiber.
You are comfortable with this, if I may ask Assemblymember DeLong to ask the question again, so just to make sure that we've got the correct information. So Assemblymember DeLong, if you would like to ask your questions, I think there were two.
I
could be off
remember
on
my
that.
second question. I don't
Okay,
remember the
let's go with that one then.
The second question had to do with the maps, and I know Assemblyman Watts said it's with natural heritage, but does the department keep any maps of those species?
Thank you. Jasmine Kleiber, Biodiversity Division Administrator with the Nevada Department of Wildlife, for the record. The short answer is yes, and we typically generate those maps collaboratively with the Division of Natural Heritage as well as other partners like the Xerxes Society. Data is collected on a regular basis by different organizations, including ourselves, agencies at the federal level like the NRCS as well as BLM, and most of that data will get conglomerated and included for generating those distribution maps for species. For species where there is limited data, we often rely on the habitats that are associated with those species to generate distribution maps.
Do you have a follow-up? Oh, are you sure? Look at that, I'm giving you permission. First time for everything. Assemblymember LaRue Hatch.
Thank you, Chair. I actually do remember Assemblymember DeLong's first question because it was similar to mine. So the question is just, what would this allow NDOW to do? How would this change current practice? And then my additional question is, how would you collaborate with other agencies or private parties that are impacted through this bill?
Jasmine Kleiber, Nevada Department of Wildlife, for the record. Collaboration, as I mentioned during the previous answer, is already ongoing. We work very closely with many different nonprofit organizations as well as government agencies at both federal, state, and even local levels to try to conserve the species that we're aware of. What the challenge is with the Department of Wildlife at this time not having authority over the species is simply that we do not have all of the tools available to more comprehensively conserve these kinds of species. So we are often at the table speaking to habitat restoration opportunities and enhancement opportunities, protection opportunities, and providing support to the partners that we work with so that they can implement these projects.
Thank you so much for coming back to the table to be able to answer those questions. Really appreciate it because I think that there was some small questions that we don't know if the sponsor was able to answer. Greatly appreciate that. And there's one more department coming to the table as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be brief. Director Goycochea, for the record, in neutral on this bill. Assemblymember Hanson, thank you for that question. That is definitely something that has been on our mind of how we're going to manage these pests, and I want to make sure that we don't have a problem there. I want to thank the bill sponsor for agreeing to work with us. We still do have some concerns, but as you heard earlier this afternoon, we work with NDOW on just about everything we do, and I'm sure that when Alan and I get our heads together, we'll come up with a solution. Thank you.
Hello, Jamie McClinton for the record, JameyMCCLINTON. I'm the administrator for the Nevada Division of Natural Heritage. Our division has been referenced several times through this conversation, so I'm here to just provide some context on what NDNH does and how AB 85 could impact our agency. NDNH is a non-regulatory agency within the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. To paraphrase our mission, we maintain and provide objective, scientifically sound biodiversity data to our state and federal agency partners and to the public. And the purpose of that is to help inform land use, planning, and conservation decisions. NDNH supports NDOW's management of non-game animals by collecting and curating data on at-risk species from multiple sources and regularly exchanging data with the department. We also directly collaborate with NDOW biologists to conduct monitoring. NDNH currently maintains data for over 200 native invertebrates. However, invertebrates are severely understudied in proportion to their diversity and their ecological and economic importance, as has been mentioned earlier. For example, over the last year, NDNH has compiled a list of over 4,700 terrestrial insect species known in the state of Nevada. The vast majority of these lack data required to evaluate conservation status or inform responsible management. This limits NDNH's ability to fulfill our mission with respect to invertebrates. AB 85 would allow the state of Nevada to become eligible for significant funding, grant funding for invertebrate research and conservation that is currently only available to other states. This would facilitate collection of data that can be added to the NDNH database. AB 85 would improve the availability and quality of information on invertebrates that Heritage is able to provide. This in turn will improve the ability of NDOW and other management agencies to prioritize limited resources and prevent at-risk species from declining to the point of formal Endangered Species Act listings or losses of biodiversity. Thanks for the opportunity to present NDNH's perspective on this.
Thank you so much. That was incredibly informational. Greatly appreciate it. Is there anybody else that would like to come to the table in neutral? Seeing none, would you like to make any closing comments? Waiving the closing comments. So I will close the hearing on AB 85. I always keep on saying closing comments instead of remarks. So I will close the hearing on AB 85. We'll now move into public comment. As a reminder, members of the public can provide public comment in person, by phone, or submit written public comment to the committee's email up to 24 hours after the meeting. Instructions for providing public comment can be found on the agenda, including the call-in information. Public comment will be limited to 2 minutes per speaker. Staff will time when each speaker during public comment. Is there anybody, before I read the rest, is there anybody that would like to come to the table to provide public comment here in Carson, Las Vegas, or on the phones?
Chair, the public line is open and working, but we have no callers at this time.
That concludes our meeting for today. Our next meeting will be on Monday, March 3rd at 4 p.m. The meeting is adjourned, and thank you.